Welcome, everyone, to the Seeking Justice podcast, where I have a very special guest, the indefatigable and courageous and incredibly humble, with a sharp, robust A-type personality, overachiever extraordinaire, Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, known as Dr. Mo, or the Beast from the Middle East on Instagram. And he's an English-Australian emergency physician trainee, humanitarian and former international athlete of Palestinian heritage. Indeed, the first Palestinian to represent the United Kingdom in international rugby, and has also won titles in jiu-jitsu. Dr. Mo is currently residing in West Australia, where he's undertaking his emergency physician traineeship, and he has done a lot of work around the world, and most notably 2 deployments to Gaza in the last year. And he's been doing some great advocacy, very important in terms of the unmitigated, deplorable crisis that's going on there. And I wanted to talk to Dr. Mo today about looking forward to the future. I saw that he had proposed a Australian field hospital in Gaza, and to talk about the humanity of the situation and what each of us can do in Australia, around the world, in order to stop this horrendous state of affairs that most of us have never seen in our lifetime. So welcome, Mohammed. How are you?
Thank you for that introduction. That was quite an introduction. I'm okay. I'm working really hard in the background. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to do, and obviously, as you can imagine, the situation in Gaza is always evolving. I kind of feel guilty that I'm not there now and helping
Yes,
out, but when I was there, I felt so helpless half the time because
yep,
there would so many bodies would come in, and you only have one pair of hands, and you just don't have the necessary equipment to help people. So I knew that it was important that when I left Gaza, I had to come back with something for Gaza to help in this situation. And obviously the natural thing was a hospital.
absolutely. And I mean, it's a cruel irony of being a caring, empathetic human that it's you that feels guilty when the people committing these atrocities, God knows what they feel and how, the society has degraded to such an extent of the dehumanisation that this goes on. I did see your comment, I think it was on the was it the One Path Network, talking about a particular incident in Gaza where you had a just impossible decision in the moment as to whether you were going to help a man, and then there was a lady there. So, I mean, on behalf of everyone who's been inspired by your courage, and I know you've said, of course, it doesn't really make any difference when people kind of give you well, you shouldn't feel guilty, but you've certainly done more than most, and you're inspiring each of us to step up and do more in these circumstances. So thank you for that so much from the bottom of my heart and from everyone else who is watching, I'm sure, and who has seen what you've done. I mean, it is absolutely incredible in the context of this being the world's first live stream genocide, and your reporting from there. I mean, effectively doing some journalism whilst you were there, which allows us all to, see into what's going on and in the moment of what's going on. I mean, amazingly, I saw your video that went viral up on the big screen at the International Court of Justice when His Excellency, the Ambassador for Palestine, was giving his submissions in the recent round of hearings. So it's had such a huge impact. Before we get deep into that, I just wanted to ask, how was your day and where are you? Where are you now?
So I've just finished work. I'm actually in the Kimberleys. I'm doing a bit of work out rurally here in Australia. I'm working in some of the most deprived communities and working a lot with the indigenous community as well. So it's something that I've always loved to do. Obviously coming from the UK, not used to working in like rural places like this, and then since moving to Australia, and having that ability to work in places that are so far away from from cities and society in general. You really get a different sense of Australia. You see a different part of Australia. You see a different culture of Australia. And you get to experience completely different characters. People that live out here are very different to people that live in the city or even live in smaller, quieter towns,
Yes.
because it's so rural out here.
Yep.
But for me, it actually was one of the, because I've done this for years. It was actually one of the most beneficial things to go to Gaza with, because here there's no X-ray machine, there's no CT scanner, there's no formal blood work. You're very short-staffed, and it's okay most of the time. But when you get a big problem here, or you get some really sick patients, you're pretty much on your own. And it was pretty much like that in Gaza. So I'd had years of experience of doing that kind of work before going into Gaza, and it helped. So yeah, it's not a bad spot out here.
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful wilderness and the wildness is truly incredible. And I'm sure it's foreign coming from the UK to have so much blue sky above your head
Yeah,
as
and the
well.
weather as well.
And so are you still an emergency physician trainee? How far through your medical training
Yeah,
are you?
so I'm early advanced now, early advanced trainee. Um, I've got loads of experience before I started the training program. I was working in ED for a few years before I started the program. But I've been doing a lot of other extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
Um, whether it was sport or whether it was obviously doing stuff like this. So I took 6 months out of the training program from February to August. And the primary reason was I was going to Gaza. And the first time that I went to Gaza, there were so many issues with getting into Gaza, and cancellations, and then teams being held over there. I thought the best thing to do was to make sure that I had a considerable block of time off, so that if I go there and I needed to stay longer, I could stay longer. If I didn't get in straight away, I could reapply again. And that was part of the reason. Was I knew this was a mission that I needed to go on again, and it was just more to be able to do it, freely.
Everyone's asked about your motivations for going, the fact that it's going to be potentially fatal. I was interested because you mentioned your religious reasons for
Mhm.
making the decision to go, if you're happy to share that.
Yeah, so in Islam, there is a saying in the Quran which is, if you save one life, it's as if you've saved the whole of humanity. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to become a doctor. There are many reasons why I wanted to become a doctor. One of them was watching my dad, every day when I was a kid, and he really inspired me. But it was that where I felt to myself that if I was a doctor, I could always come home and know that I didn't have to sell somebody something that I didn't think they needed, or I didn't have to, you know, do something that I wasn't comfortable with. When you're a doctor, all you're trying to do is help people, and I felt that was just a nice way to live your life. And it's part of the reason why I don't go into necessarily private practice or things like that. I'm an emergency physician, so it's in the public space, and I like working obviously out in rural communities and things like that. I think it's very important as a doctor that you view it as a vocation and not necessarily as a job. Obviously everyone needs to make money, everyone
Yes.
needs to live, so that's also important as well. But for me, it was just that religious element where I just felt like, this is something that can benefit me and benefit society and benefit me spiritually every day. And it was my job. And I thought that was really, powerful. And that's why I wanted to get into medicine. And obviously, when you see the images in Gaza, one day, I don't even think it'll be that long. I think in a couple of years' time, 5 years' time, we'll all be turning around and saying, what happened then? What did we do to stop what was going on? And I wanted to be able to say that I went there and I helped those people, regardless of how dangerous the situation was, regardless of what circumstances I put myself in. I was there for those people and I helped those people. And, you take a Hippocratic oath, you've got to mean it, and that's serving anyone, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, gender. And yeah, I believe in that powerfully. I believe in that wholeheartedly. And that's why I went.
Yeah. Look, I can relate for that impulse for humanity. I mainly practice in human rights law. I don't think I could be a lawyer without having that focus, that the moral ambition and people doing work they believe in and that gives them some kind of spiritual nourishment.
Yeah.
I listened to the interview with you and Jan Fran and sharing that just inability, not in a naive way, to understand that there is cruel, barbaric evil in the world and people profiteering off this cruelty, but almost not understanding the adage about evil thrives when good people stand by and do nothing. Like, what are people doing? And how simple it would be if everyone acted up. Something I've been reflecting on, especially with the Genocide Convention responsibilities and obligations of Australia and other signatories, which is most of the United Nations member countries. I mean, and this might sound bold, but I just think this is a baseline. Like, why can't all of their navies join together and go to the Mediterranean and break through Israel's naval blockade and get food in? Not through a silly Joe Biden type war that's going to float away and that's just an excuse for allowing the suffering to continue, but literally like intervention. It doesn't have to be aggressive militarily, but it can be bold and assertive. I mean, the United Nations clearly needs a navy or something that can actually go and intervene. I just read a post about a hearing today in the United Nations Security Council, and most countries at the meeting urge Israel to stop starving Palestinians. There is no point in the UN if the best they can do is to urge the oppressor to stop. And it's true. Like, none of it is having an effect. So we need to do more. And given that Anthony Albanese has just won a commanding majority, he's got no excuses of being weak on this issue anymore. As you said in a recent interview, the tide is turning. Even the BBC spoke the words ethnic cleansing with no, pro-Israel propaganda. And the New York Times came out with a story on the paramedics who were executed. I really think this is the time for Anthony Albanese to stand up. And Susan Ley, who's just been elected the head of the opposition, both Susan and Anthony used to be in the Parliamentary Friends of Palestine group. I'm not sure if that group exists anymore. What are your thoughts and reflections, having come back, interacted with a lot of people around the country and called out to Anthony Albanese to meet with you? And what are you going to propose?
Well, look, I think this is a very contentious issue. It's a contentious issue because the media make it a contentious issue. But if you go to the average person on the streets, they will tell you that they're horrified with what they're seeing coming out of Gaza. The average person on the streets does not think that starving 1 million children is okay, that indiscriminately bombing and destroying hospitals, schools, mosques, churches is okay, that blocking aid from getting in is okay. I mean, these are not controversial positions to take, but the media have been putting it in a way where it's almost controversial just to even criticize what's going on or even to speak what's going on. And I think, what I want to do, or my mission is it's not just about getting a children's hospital into Gaza. It's about trying to change the narrative, right? Saying politically charged words like genocide and ethnic cleansing and things like that. The issue is you've got multiple barriers when you say stuff like that. One, you've got the legal barriers because these things are happening right now in the ICJ. I mean, you don't need to be an expert to know that it's genocide that's going on. Everyone can evidently see that. And, when they say it's a probable genocide, there's a very high bar threshold for them to say, the ICJ to say it's a probable genocide. When you've been to Gaza like me, you know it's a genocide because you see it with your own eyes. So you have, people will try and, trip you over from a technicality point of view and say, it's an alleged genocide. And then what happens is the conversation becomes about the word genocide and not actually what's going on. And what I'm trying to do is I've been so frustrated with the conversation, and I've been there on the ground. I know what's going on. And it doesn't do those kids any good in Gaza having this conversation back and forth where we try and, you know, get the right definition of what's going on. Let's put all that to one side, right? Yeah? And let's focus on the humanity of what's going on. Because if I can humanize these people and I can humanize these children, then it doesn't matter what your technicality of genocide is or this, that, and the other. They're dying in the most horrific ways anywhere in the world. And this is the message I'm trying to get across. And I think, you know, what I also want to try and do is I want to build bridges between the different communities, you know, that have been affected by this. I'm not going to sit here and blame, you know, pro-Zionist, whether it's Jewish people or Christians. I'm not going to sit here and blame them for, you know, the beliefs that they've had growing up about what Israel is and what it's done and things like that. You know, they've grown up in a different lens. They've grown up with a different perspective. I think, though, what I need to do and my mission is I want to give them the grace in order to be able to see the other side, in order for them to humanize the other side. I want to give them the grace and the ability to walk over to this side and see what's going on. And it doesn't help when people are in their face going, it's a genocide and you're this and you're that and blah, 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 blah. Because trust me, when you hold a child in your hand and they bleed to death in your arms and you are soaked in that child's blood, it changes the way that you see these things. You know, I don't want to be shouting in people's face. I just want people to understand that we shouldn't be seeing these children die in this way. And I think any reasonable person, because remember, the other side is also human as well. And I think if you were to appeal to the humanity of the other side and say to them, these children are dying, they're getting shot in the head, they're starving to death, you don't agree with this. You've got children as well. You've got nieces and nephews. You don't agree with this. And I think if you just give them the ability to be able to realize that actually, you know what, what's going on is wrong. And what my message or what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build a bridge between communities and I'm trying to get back the humanity on both sides, because in a genocide we all lose our humanity. The ones committing a genocide lose their humanity and the ones being genocided lose their humanity as well. So we need to humanize each other, and as much as I want to humanize those kids in Gaza, I need to humanize the other people that are doing it. And those people that are doing it, in the moment that they're doing it, they are monsters. When you shoot a child in the head and you know it's a child, you're a monster for doing that. There's no reason and there's no excuse to do that. But I need to be able to give the chance for that person to realize their mistake and walk it back to the other side. It doesn't mean that we don't seek justice one day in the future for people who have committed war crimes. It doesn't mean that. But there are plenty of people that haven't committed war crimes on the other side that we need to win over. And, you know, like anything, you can't defeat an ideology militarily. You can't.
Yeah.
And you can't defeat it by, you know, shouting the opposition into a corner. You need to win the hearts and minds. And that's what I want to do. I'm trying to win the hearts and minds. And look, there's plenty of people that are going out there and protesting and, you know, jumping over fences and doing what. And listen, I understand where everyone's coming from with their forms of protest, and every form of protest has its role to play. But, you know, I'm a doctor and I'm a humanitarian. And because of that, I'm just trying to focus on the humanity of these children, and I'm trying to focus on the humanity of what's going on. And I think if we can humanize the children, we can humanize the other side. And I think if we can humanize the other side, then we can have a reasonable conversation. But right now, you know, the lawyers for Israel have argued that the starvation of those 1 million children in Gaza actually reduces obesity. That's their argument right now in court. That they've argued that actually it reduces obesity. I mean, this is where we've got to, you know, in this discourse. When you see children literally starving to death, malnutritioned, starving to death, and the other side are saying, well, you know, it helps obesity rates, they're clutching at straws. And I think when the other side are beginning to clutch at straws, people are beginning to see the facade of what it is. This is an oppressive system. And I think we need to be able to open the door to let the other side and let people who are reasonable come to the other side and see that actually all we want is peace, you know, and all Palestinians want is the same freedoms and liberties that the other side have. They want to live in peace. They want to see their children grow up.
I interviewed Christine Figuera, who put together the 500 Jewish Australians against ethnic cleansing full-page ads in the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age. There's obviously massive support amongst Jewish Americans, especially younger generations. Jewish Voice for Peace. There's Never Again Is Now. There's such massive numbers of Jewish people who are against what is going on. And that is not to say that it has to be a binary of like you either support basic fundamental human rights for everyone or otherwise you want Israel to disappear. That's completely misconceived.
Yeah, it's a straw man argument, and that's always been the argument. When you ever watch these debates, you know, if you go on Piers Morgan, he'll always tell you, "Do you condemn Hamas?" But you know, I always, you know, I'd always look at it and go, "Well, actually, I condemn the person who funded Hamas.
Yes,
I condemn those who funded Hamas, and the person who funded Hamas and allowed Hamas to flourish was Benjamin Netanyahu.
Exactly.
He said that himself. He said we need to. So, you know,
and I'll just add in there, and the country that's just given Donald Trump a $400 million bribe, being the palace in the sky. I mean, Qatar were also funding Hamas as well. Meanwhile, he's throwing, you know, students who wrote op-eds for Palestinian basic human rights in ICE detention centres. It's just absurd.
And this is what I mean. It lacks, you know, the conversation lacks nuance, and you know, you can't have a reasonable conversation with people that aren't reasonable. You know, someone like Piers Morgan is just not reasonable. You know, he doesn't want to talk about the nuances of it. You know, Hezbollah, Hamas, all of these people right here, you don't have to agree with them, and you don't have to support what they do, because obviously crimes and war crimes were committed by them. So you don't have to support that at all. And I'm not advocating for that at all. But at the same time as well, you can't sit there and say that they have just formed out of hatred when they have been propped up by Benjamin Netanyahu and his party. And they also formed because of the root cause of this whole problem, which was the occupation, whether that's the occupation of South Lebanon or whether that's the occupation of Palestine. So, you know, these, you know, before Hamas, it was the PLO and it was Yasser Arafat, and they were the ones fighting, and then they laid down their arms, and look what's happening in the West Bank.
And it's just a fundamental basis of history, and it's recognised in international law that people who are occupied have a right to defend themselves and to resist. And you know, I mean, what is extraordinary, acknowledging the absolute heinous brutality and how many tens, hundreds of thousands of people have been massacred and murdered and executed in the last 19 months, but it's also the falling apart of a system of oppression and apartheid recognised by the International Court of Justice last July that has been going for 75 years. So the fact that it's come crashing down relatively in such a short period of time is quite extraordinary. But I absolutely hear you on the importance of focusing on the humanity, because legal words and terms and principles, when you're in that moment, don't achieve anything. I mean, those processes need to happen, but for your purposes, they don't achieve anything in the moment.
They don't. You know what I mean? And shouting and screaming and you know, they just don't. It didn't help me when I had people dying right there. It didn't help me when we were so overwhelmed with the bodies that came in that we literally left children to die on the floor. I mean, this is real. What's really happening on the ground right now in Gaza, and you know, we would go to tents where children are staying that are severely injured, and they die slowly in those tents. All of these things are happening, and I don't really care, you know, whether, you know, these, you know, the where they make controversial topics about, like, you know, kneecap and them saying something rather than, you know, 1 million children starving. But this is what I mean. I mean, the mask has fallen off. So now it becomes an argument becomes about the culture. It becomes about governing language. It becomes about policing the language that you use. All right, fine. Let's not use the language. That's what I'm trying to do. Let's not use the language so you don't police my language. Let's just focus on something that you can't argue with, which is the children. Let's focus on these children. They're innocent, right? They're innocent. They haven't picked up guns. They haven't shot at anybody. They were born into this concentration camp that is Gaza. as David Cameron described it in 2012, the world's largest open-air prison, where 60% of the children prior to October the 7th had malnutrition, where 70% had PTSD symptoms from all the bombings that have happened over the last 20 years in Gaza. This did not start on October the 7th. And, you know, the focus always goes back to that one day. And that one day was a horrific day. And there was war crimes that were committed, and there were children that were killed on both sides. And not just that, but the Israeli army as well has killed people as well on that day as well. And that was something that I think there was a report released, I think it was almost yesterday, by the Israelis themselves, that they admit to killing a man that was in a safe room, and they shot through the safe room and they killed him through the safe room. So, you know, these things are beginning to come out. Remember, you know, when it first started and there was the claim of 40 beheaded babies?
Yes.
And even the president, Joe Biden, came on stage and said, you know, he saw pictures of 40 beheaded babies, which even his own officials had to walk back and say he didn't see that. This is what I mean about, you know, I don't even want it to be a race of atrocities, right? Because it's so obvious. If you speak to any reasonable person, you know, the atrocities that have happened to Palestinian people in the West Bank and in Gaza are astronomical. They are astronomical. Every single day that I was there, we were seeing horrific war crimes, whether it was children shot in the head, whether it was dozens of women and children being brought into the emergency department, blown up to pieces. I don't need to argue with somebody that's unreasonable. What I need to do is I need to win over the reasonable people, and I need to get people to understand that, you know, very simple, right? If you're claiming that there are militants hiding in a hospital or a school, and that hospital and school is full of women and children, right? Would you be okay if that hospital was full of Israeli women and children? Would you be okay with the Israeli army bombing that to maybe, not confirmed even, kill one mid-range level commander? Would it be okay to kill all those women and children? It wouldn't be okay. Any reasonable person would tell you it's not okay. If there's a school shooter in America, the police don't call the army to bomb the school to take out the school shooter, do they? Right? They go in and they risk their lives to take out the school shooter. But the problem is like we're arguing, or we're trying to argue. We're having these dishonest arguments. That's why it just doesn't. It's no good having these conversations. You know, as the moment you say that, you know, bombing hospitals is wrong, and then the other side say, well, they shouldn't be hiding there, even though there's no evidence that's what's happened, right? There's no concrete evidence that that's what's going on. You've asked any doctor that's been in and out of Gaza, they'll tell you the same thing. We get unrestricted access in the hospital, right? There's no swipe cards in these hospitals, right? These are old hospitals. You don't swipe in and out. All the doors are broken. The windows are broken. You can walk in and out wherever you want, right? There's media everywhere. There's families everywhere that come in and out of that hospital, right? Yeah. If you were trying to have a military base, it'd be the stupidest place to have a military, because there's just so many people that walk in and out on a day-to-day basis. And there's so many cameras. There's an entire press corps that are there filming the entrance of the emergency department and the entrance of the hospital in and out 24/7.
Yeah.
So, you know, you put all that to one side. But if the other side are saying, oh, you know, it's being used as a military base, therefore we can bomb it. Well, already you're saying that you're allowed to commit war crimes. I can't argue with a person that says it's okay to do war crimes, because if you were to ask them the same thing and say, all right, if that hospital was full of Israeli women and children, would you be okay with bombing that hospital? You wouldn't be okay with it. So the only reason you're okay with it is because you don't see the other side as worthy of living and as human. Because if you valued their life as much as you valued Israeli women and children's life, you wouldn't bomb the hospital. Because even if you bomb the hospital and you kill the militant, what about the hospital? All right, bomb the hospital. All right, let's go with it, right? Yeah, let's have this and walk our way through it. You bomb the hospital to get to a militant, right? Yeah. Why then not let in medical aid or let a field hospital go in place? Now you've destroyed that hospital. Let a field hospital in. You've destroyed a hospital to get to a militant. All right, job well done. Now let in a hospital or let in medical equipment, so the hospital that was destroyed, we can replace it, and we can have an international aid organization controlling the hospital. Yep. But they won't allow that either. So
Well, and not to forget, this is one of the highest tech militaries in human history. They've
yeah,
proved, obviously, with the assassination in Tehran, the assassinations in Beirut, and elsewhere in Lebanon and in Syria, that they can be very, very, very precise. So all of that counts against this conduct.
yeah, well, exactly. That's the thing as well. Is that's another point as well. I mean, look, I'm just trying to skim everything back, right? Yeah, just the most basic points, which is
Yes,
if you're going to bomb a hospital, why won't you let in medical equipment?
yes,
If you're only going after militants, why won't you let in baby formula? If you're only
yes,
going after militants, why won't you let in tampons for women? If you're only
yep,
going after militants, why won't you let vaccines in for children? These are things where it doesn't matter how you want to sugarcoat it. You can't argue against these things. So, I'm just trying to bring it back down to a human level and just say, hey, listen, let's focus on the children. Let's focus on the humanity of these people and let's take out the rhetoric. And what I want this campaign to be, it's not just about getting a hospital into Gaza, it's about mending bridges in the country as well. It's about getting people to sit around a table together and just realize and understand that we're all Australian, we're living on this big island together and we need to get along. And two, we're all human beings and we need to start seeing each other as humans,
and we can make a difference as well,
and we
because
can
I
make a
think a lot
difference.
of a lot of people are just fatigued and despondent, and you know, given up. Perhaps, I'm not sure. A lot of people
I, you
haven't.
know I think you're right. I think people are fatigued. People are fatigued because they can't see any tangible benefits to what they've been doing, all the protesting, and it only seems to be getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Let's get a win on the board. Let's get a W on the board. Let's get that children's hospital in there. Because once we get that children's hospital in there, right, we're going to get Australian doctors in there. We're going to get Australian cameras in there. People are then going to begin to humanize these children again, and then we can start winning on the board. And it doesn't helping children doesn't take away from the other side of what they want to do, militarily or anything else. I mean, you don't have to agree with what they're doing, but how can you argue against the children's hospital? How can you argue against a maternity unit of little babies that have just been born? How can you argue against that? How can you argue against baby formula? You can't argue against them. You can only argue against them if what you want is a genocide.
Yeah.
And it makes the other side look silly if they argue against a children's hospital, and it makes it and it shows the bigotry, and it shows the xenophobia, and it shows the racism, and it shows the intent. So look, I think what we need to do is we just need to come together and support, because one of the biggest problems that I've had, of all of this is just the pro-Palestine movement in itself. They eat each other up all the time. They very much want to point the finger, and you need to be the perfect campaigner. You need to be the perfect activist. You need to condemn every little thing. You need to have these points. And the way I look at it is, I look at it like if someone was to revert to become Muslim, right? You don't expect someone to become Muslim to suddenly be not drinking alcohol and not eating pork the next day and grow a beard and pray. You don't expect that straight away. It's all of it is a gradual process, right? Yeah. I don't expect somebody who all their life has grown up believing that, the state was a land without a people for a people without a land. I mean, that's just not true. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean,
And
and
almost a billion.
yeah, well, that's precisely terra nullius. I mean, that's just the textbook for settler colonialism, which Indigenous people, First Nations people experienced in this country until the lie was unveiled in the Mabo High Court case in 1992. It took a hell of a long time, but it
Yeah.
happened.
But it happened, yeah, exactly. And this is the thing: is like, you know, you want somebody who has grown up believing that their whole life. You want them to become the perfect pro-Palestine, activist or whatever. And that's why I just think people have to give each other grace. If somebody new wants to talk about Palestine and they've got a platform, let them talk. If a celebrity wants to say ceasefire now, I know it's 19 months later, but just welcome them.
Yes.
They might not have been educated on this. They might not know what's going on, and I think you just have to give people the grace, right? Yeah, and if I can give them the grace, right, And it was my family that was ethnically cleansed in 1948. It was me in those hospitals when those bombs were happening all around. It's my family that have been killed in Gaza. It was me that had to make those decisions of who to treat and who not to treat. There's a lot of trauma that I've had from this. But if I can give the other side grace, then you can give the other side grace. You don't need to be the perfect activist. And you also don't need to be, you don't need to start from my position. I can work with you if you just say, hey, listen, killing children is wrong. Let's just get that out the door. Let's just get that there. Once we start getting that there, then things will happen. Because once people are on board with helping children, they'll start being on board with a lot of things like educating the children, like feeding the children, all of these things. But you've got to humanize. You've got to humanize them first, and you've also got to look at the other side and just almost have a bit of pity for what's happened. To grow up with that level of hatred to a group of people who have been oppressed for so long. You've taken their home, you've kicked them off their land, you put them in concentration camps, you bomb them regularly, you imprison their children. Remember, Israel is the only place in the world where children are tried by a military court. You beat up their children, and you torture their children. You many cases of sexual assault, prisoners raped to death. All of these things, right? And still the hatred. Why? Because these people don't want to live like this, because they resist in some form or another. And it's not to say that they're the perfect victims either. You know what I mean? Palestinians don't have to be the perfect victims either. And that's another important point about all of this. Somebody who's coming from the other side doesn't have to be the perfect advocate for Palestinians. But just like Palestinians don't have to be the perfect victims either, because the other side want you to be the perfect victims. We can't have the same mentality and want them to be the perfect, allies. You've got to take
Yes.
everyone as they come. I see the other side and I see them as human, and they've caused me a lot of pain personally, my family. I grew up as a refugee most of my life, most of my early life, because of what happened in Palestine. I've had family members killed, many family members killed, but I don't want to see the other side as not human, because then I lose my humanity, and I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to happen. I don't want to happen to us what happened to them,
Yes.
because for not even just hundreds of years, for millennia, Jewish people have been oppressed. There's been rampant anti-Semitism, but that anti-Semitism, a lot of it was in Europe. A lot of it was, I remember reading Shakespeare as a kid when we were in school, and The Merchant of Venice, and the story of The Merchant of Venice. It's a very anti-Semitic play,
Yeah.
It's about this evil, Jewish merchant who, he lends money, but he doesn't want you just to pay back the money. He says if you can't pay it back, he wants a pound of flesh.
Yeah.
And it's this character, this anti-Semitism was rife throughout all of Europe for centuries.
And the history of the Middle East, and certainly of Palestine, that prior to the late 19th century, it was a melting pot of religions living in relative harmony, as I understand. I mean, Iran as well. There's a lot of Jewish people in Iran, and most people. I mean, I profess that I didn't even know that. I didn't really know anything about the demography of Iran until I met a fabulous Iranian doctor, actually, who did my master's in international human rights law at Oxford University, and he gave this. He taught us all about. He'd been imprisoned for doing activism around HIV/AIDS over there.
Yeah.
But it really blew me away, actually, to find out about that.
Yeah, look, I mean, there are villages and streets in Israel where there are Orthodox Jews that put Palestinian flags outside their windows. There are people, even the founders of Israel, like Ben Gurion, they said it was a settler colonial project. They said that themselves, and there was Jews living in peace there when Jewish people were, after the Second World War. When Britain and America refused to take in Jewish refugees,
Yes.
they came to Palestine, and Palestinians welcomed them into their homes, welcomed them to live inside their own homes.
Wow.
And, that was before the Nakba. So, Palestinians have never had this historic issue with Jewish people. It's quite the contrary, and, a lot of my favorite, heroes, whether it's, academia, whether it's movies and actors, whether it's thinkers, a lot of them are Jewish.
Yes,
like I respect a lot what Jewish people have done for society and the achievements they've done. There's no animosity with me for
yes,
Jewish people at all.
yep,
And I've grown up with Jewish people. I've went to university with Jewish, and they've been some of the nicest, kindest people that I've ever met. So, and this is what I mean about not conflating the state of Israel with Jewish people, because they're two different things. They're two different
absolutely.
ideologies.
Yeah. But
And
but it seems to be the war machine that conflates that, and where the media is complicit with the war machine, it amplifies that false
look,
conflation. And then it
it
all
does. And
becomes about distraction, as you said. It's about a rap band from Belfast. Becomes the
yeah,
news of the world, and it's just like, excuse me, children are being bombed as they starve. I mean, come on.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And you know, it's actually sad to see. It really is sad to see because when I was there in Gaza, we went to Al Shifa Hospital, right? And when we saw the ruins of Al Shifa Hospital when it was destroyed, you could see the graffiti on the wall in Hebrew from soldiers who wrote things like "vengeance" on there. Some of them wrote birthday wishes to their children, and they had the Star of David on there. And I just thought to myself, like, what are you doing? What are you desecrating here? That Star of David has seen so much oppression, right? For people wearing that
Yeah.
Star of David. They've been killed for wearing that. And you're sitting here destroying a hospital, killing doctors and nurses, and then imprinting that same star on the walls and writing vengeance underneath. It was a moment that really shocked me when I saw it, because I was like, this is not the Judaism I know. It's not the Judaism I've experienced.
Yeah. And I mean, the horror that is caused for the perpetrators of all of this, and even with the military censor, you hear about the suicide rates of Israeli soldiers. You hear about the PTSD. You hear about the massive refusal of reservists to actually go and serve again. I
Yeah,
mean, the impact on Israeli society is just, and obviously the people calling the shots, the Benjamin Netanyahus, they're not going to fight. It's not them risking themselves. His son lives in Miami, as I understand. I mean, you
he
know,
lives in Miami with personal security and all the rest of it. He would never put his son in the front line. He wouldn't even put his son in the West Bank. And again, this is what I mean.
yeah, it's disgusting.
It's yeah, it is, and that's why, you've got to remember, this is why I don't waste my time,
Yes,
with, and don't waste my energy on trying to argue with, lawyers for Israel who are like, oh, we're reducing the obesity rate in Gaza, while we're literally seeing children blown to bits. And they're going, oh yeah, well at least we're reducing the obesity rate. Who asked you to reduce the obesity rate? Just even from a simple one, who's asking you to reduce the obesity rate?
to my mind, I think that just is a contemptuous attitude toward the International Court of Justice. Like they're just turning up, taking the piss because they're literally defecating all over the international rules-based order. And I mean, that's
But
that's what has really shocked me, and just the weak stance of Australia and the United Kingdom. There's also documents coming out now that Keir Starmer and David Lammy have lied to Parliament because they said they weren't sending weapons to Israel. It now turns out they were. There was recently an article in Declassified Australia about the list of exports to Israel from Australia of military use, 90 pages from the 7th of October 23 to 29 March 2025, when Richard Marles and Penny Wong were all assuring us that there's nothing to see here, we're not doing anything. A lot of what you've talked about is the grace and resilience of Palestinians. And I have, in fact, the first episode of this podcast was interviewing a young man in northern Gaza who is a graphic designer. He's a young professional. He does, freelance work. He's very good at what he does. He's very fluent in English, multilingual. All he wants is to be able to work and look after his family. I was talking to my friend in Gaza who actually designed I engaged him, contracted him to. He's a graphic designer, video editor to do the video for this podcast, and I paid him through Upwork because he obviously couldn't get any work. The payments were difficult to get, and he's just a young professional doing the best that he can, studying whatnot. And me and a lady in Sydney who is also a mutual friends, and I interviewed her as well. We sent a quite significant letter to Anthony Albanese, Tony Burke, Penny Wong, to basically make the case for Palestinian refugees to come to Australia on the basis that, and I've done refugee advocacy for a long time. I'm not naive to how politicized that became and polarized that became, but we've kind of moved past the Manus Nauru era, and I think in a situation as acutely urgent as this for the whole of the world, there's an opportunity for Australia and the example is some years ago they brought in a group of Karen refugees from Burma who were, I think, living near the Thai border, and they went to there was a remote regional community in Victoria who were calling out for people because there'd been a brain drain, everyone had left, gone to the cities, the young people had gone, and so they somehow this idea came and they brought a whole lot of Karen refugees to that town. And the economic benefit was $42 million. There was a number of studies done in the years following, and the community harmony, all of these kinds of things. I mean, I just want to help my friend get the hell out of Gaza and come and potentially benefit the Australian community with his skills. And we're trying to organise a delegation to go and meet with these politicians, really to engage what you're talking about, having that human conversation and just saying you can actually do things. This isn't a controversial, as you said, like in their political brains, the Canberra bubble, whatever you might think, they might, be needing to be cautious or this and that, but it's not. They need to put all that aside and just say Australia can make a difference. And Anthony Albanese was responding to your comments recently, I saw, and he said, oh, well, Australia's not a major player. And the response I have to that is a little bit of Australian history that most people don't know. One of Anthony Albanese's heroes and many Labor politicians' heroes is, of course, former Prime Minister Bob Hawke. Now, in 1986, Bob Hawke went to a special meeting of the Commonwealth Heads of Government in London, and they basically pushed through a total trade embargo on apartheid South Africa. Margaret Thatcher was hosting the meeting. She was not sure about it. She was wanting to be more cautious. Bob Hawke led, then I think it was 52 or 56 Commonwealth nations, and apartheid fell in the years following very rapidly. And when Nelson Mandela came to visit Australia, I think it was 1990, he thanked Bob Hawke and the Australian trade unions for that trade embargo, because that is what made a difference. Now, Australia can be a major player if it chooses to be, and that's the message I want to send to Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong, the new Attorney General, the Immigration Minister, everyone really, that it's not too late, as you said. We can absolutely make a difference. Now is the time to do it.
I agree. I think, It's an easy thing to say that we're not a major player. It's not about being a major player, though. It's about, we're not a major player in, why we've got nuclear submarines. Do you know what I mean? Why we get nuclear submarine? Like, I don't. We can be a major player if we want to be. The Middle East is a rapidly developing place. They are building the tallest towers. They're having these new cities, and all of these things are going on in the Middle East. Syria needs rebuilding. Lebanon needs rebuilding. Gaza will need rebuilding. We have got so many materials in the ground that can help and rebuild all those places. We have so much opportunity for trade that we could become a major player if we wanted to. We could become, and it doesn't have to be a major player through military might. And I think we keep looking at the world through the lens of military might, and you don't have to have military might to be influential. You don't.
You can have moral might.
You can have moral might, exactly. And you just have to be brave to do this. You have to have courage to do this. And look, I don't want to criticize Albanese too much because I need him on my side. But what I'll say is I've seen him on the rallies when he was younger.
Yes.
I've seen the way he spoke. I've seen the passion that he's had. I know inside, I know he wants to do the right thing.
Yeah.
It's just about having the courage to do the right thing. And I think what we need to do is we need to set an environment for him and a political landscape for him to do the right thing. We need to hand it, basically, if we have to hand it over on a golden platter for him to do it, then that's what we're going to have to do. So if I need to plan this hospital, if I need to talk to foreign government, I'll do all of those things. I just want to get this done for the children in Gaza, and I want them to stop dying and stop being killed. And once we get that hospital in, all these ICJ case, the horrors of what we've seen, they're not going away. They're not going to go away. There's fundamentally a change that's going to happen in the Middle East. I don't know what that is at the minute. That's the scary thing that we're all looking at. We don't know what that change will be. Benjamin Netanyahu is saying that they're going to go all out in the war, and they're going to continue regardless of. They're going to do a full invasion now.
They've already gone all out. I mean, how much more all out can they go?
This is the thing. This is the thing. Like, I just think they're burying themselves quicker. They're losing the West. They're losing the support of the West, and the West has thrown out the international order that they created.
Yes,
they created after they won World War II. And I'm just looking at them going, why would you throw out the international base order that's catered around your rules?
Yeah,
it's catered around your rules
and benefits
you guys. Why are you throwing it out? And you only throw it out to the benefit to the global south because they're watching what's going on right now, and everybody is looking for something new, and that's why BRICS is on its way up, and the African nations like Burkina Faso and all of these places are all beginning to kick out Europeans from or European governments from controlling their resources. All of this is happening because of Gaza. Right, and Gaza is the focal point to all of this,
and the hypocrisy, the just blatant hypocrisy,
and the hypocrisy, and the blatant hypocrisy. So, look, we're at an exciting time and a very scary time. This could go either way, and I don't know which way Trump's going to go because he's a very transactional president, and you've got one side that want to get him into costly wars and potentially ruin his legacy, and you've got the other side giving him $400 million. Private planes and investing $1 trillion in his country and all of these things. So, and building golf courses for him and stuff. So, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just looking at it and I'm going, maybe it's transactional enough that he might actually do the right thing. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And I just wanted to pick up on what you said and the theme of what you said about, moving past the division, the divisive name calling, the blaming, and just to get to the humanity around the table. And I can really see that because I agree that, deep inside, I think Anthony Albanese and Susan Ley, I mean, they're engaging in this pantomime because the status quo has become so diminished over time. But because, and I'm not, I mean, I've been a protester my whole adult life, but I'm just going into his shoes. When he had activists outside his office, painting it red with paint and all that kind of stuff, of course he's going to get his back up and he's going to, lash out and maybe do nothing. But I think those protests were very important to keep pressure on and all that kind of stuff. But strategically, and especially in this moment, I think having those conversations around the table, I mean, I believe truly that if 5% of Australians picked up the phone tomorrow and called him, it's actually quite funny when you telephone the Prime Minister, because you call the number and someone picks up and goes, "Hello, Prime Minister's office." And you're like, "Can I speak to the Prime Minister?" Oh, yeah, he's not available. Can I take a message? But, if there was that much engagement and pressure, he would start realising there's an urgent thirst for justice and humanity.
It's coming. I can feel it. It is coming. And, we've just got to be on the right side of history. It's not too late to be on the right side of history. There are many powers that are working against stopping this war. But right now, there's a shift. There's a shift in the global order. There's a shift in world opinion and what's going on. And I think it's a good time to lead the way. Lead the way. Be the historic Prime Minister. You've already had a historic win. Be the greatest Prime Minister the country's ever had.
Yes.
Let us out, through a pandemic. Now lead us out through the greatest global shift in world order. That's what you have the chance to do.
Indeed.
And look, I think he can do it. I've got to be optimistic. I think he can do it. I think he can be the guy that can do it. I've seen what he said. I've seen how he's spoken before in the past, and I've seen his message about compassion. Sometimes you've got to remember that there's things going on behind the scenes that we'll never see and we'll never understand.
Yes.
Right? But what we've got to do is we've just got to, again, give grace and just see what happens. Because I know in his heart, I know where he stands.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really powerful place to end. And I thank you so much for your time, Dr. Mo. And I also had a question, and I think you've already answered this, but I was interested about combining your skills in jiu-jitsu with diplomacy and, those ideas of making those moves in a very kind of well-thought and well-considered way. And I think, this is the way forward. So I wish you all the very best. It'd be great to keep in touch. I'm hoping to get a delegation to meet with the Prime Minister as well about, getting Palestinian refugees here and, and getting your field hospital off the ground. I did interview Dr. Natalie Thurtle, who went with Médecins Sans Frontières to Palestine a number of times, including December 2023. And it was good to see. She'd done work, of course, with the Australasian College of Emergency Medicine. And I looked up and I saw they had put out a media release, and I saw that the Australian Medical Association had also put out a position statement mid-last year. But I think it'd be good to also see bodies like that. The Australian Council of Trade Unions, the Norwegian Federation of Trade Unions just came out and made a big statement. So like you said, it's certainly not too late, and there's plenty of things that people can do. And if everyone does their small bit, it makes a very big difference.
Exactly. Thank you so much, and hopefully we will stay in touch.
Brilliant. Take care and say hello to the beautiful Kimberly for me.
I will do. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.